Europa Universalis 5 is not EU4 version 2.0 with prettier graphics. This game is something much bigger. It's a fusion of the best systems Paradox has created over the past decade. In this video, I will show you which elements EU5 draws from CK3, Victoria 3 and Imperator Rome. But more importantly, what truly sets Europa Universalis 5 apart from EU4. So, welcome Imperialist Lucas here, a guy who has spent quite a lot of hours playing various Paradox titles, sometimes chasing achievements, sometimes just conquering the world, or experimenting with stacking modifiers to build a mighty economy. The good old days. I also have a small request. If you're planning to buy Europa Universalis 5 or any Paradox game, I'd be very grateful if you use my affiliate link. You should see a message in your cart confirming that the affiliate link has been activated. I am a small full-time YouTube creator and I won't hide that the income from such affiliate links is a significant boost to my household budget. It allows me to keep creating content without worrying about tomorrow. At last, I can show you Europa Universalis 5, so I'll start with how this game differs greatly from EU4. EU4 has always been a wonderful game for me. It was the game that hit the bullseye for me, and as you've seen, it's the one I've spent over 12,000 hours in. I didn't realize it at the time, but this game won me over because it was very similar to board games, which I still play to this day. In EU4, as you know very well, we have the Monarchy point system, meaning we gain certain resources each month, exactly like in board games, and then convert them into other resources such as money or manpower, for example, by spending them on the development of provinces. There's also a mechanic called building an engine, meaning stacking various modifiers so that you can use them effectively at some specific point later. So exactly like in a board game, in EU5 this is no longer the case. Just so we understand each other, I mean that there are no instant changes. Most decisions you make or values you modify are processes now. For example, introducing new laws is now a slow process of implementation. Or changing the values that define your country can even take hundreds of years. And to be clear, it's not true, as Paradox claims, that there is no modifier stacking in this game. That phenomenon still exists, especially in the technology tree, where we gradually gain certain advancements. But you'll often encounter things like new unit types instead of unit bonuses, or new buildings that allow you to do something instead of simply giving you a bonus to doing it. And the best thing is that you don't always have to research everything. In technology, you can go down a different path and not have certain things your opponent has, or vice versa. In Europa Universalis 4, within a single technological group, everyone basically got the same things as technology progressed. And if we exclude military tech, then basically the entire world got the same things at every tech level. In EU5, because there are literally hundreds of technologies divided by country, religion and culture, every nation can go down a very unique path. Although, as in every game of this type, over time some meta will surely appear. Yes, the tech tree in EU5 resembles the one from Victoria 3, except that it's even bigger, and unlike Victoria 3, here every country will go down its own unique path. In Victoria 3, practically everyone researches everything anyway. Never mind. The important thing is that I had a huge concern when I learned that EU5 would not have monarchy points, and that engine building would be heavily limited, that it might turn out that I wouldn't like the game, because EU5 would lack the thing that captured my heart in EU4. And you know what? Luckily, those fears turned out to be unfounded. Europa Universalis 5 has a hell of a lot more to offer because I got a simulation of a living world with hundreds of countries that didn't exist in EU4, hundreds of different cultures that are in the game, and dozens of religions I didn't even know existed. In this game, the population even has its own language. It's a real simulation, something much closer to Victoria 3. CK3 doesn't even come close. Or even that mobile game, Age of History 3. It really hit me when I played Poland under Casimir III's reign. I think every player will experience something similar when they play as a country they are from, or one whose history they know very well. Here I'll give you a small spoiler, but not much. It's just the first 20 years of gameplay. Poland under Casimir, later called the Great, struggled with being after the period of fragmentation, meaning it was divided. It was strongly decentralized and the nobility was extremely powerful. On top of that, we controlled less than half the country. Around Poznan, people probably hadn't even heard of the Polish king. All this meant that royal power was practically nothing. After some time, the nobility wanted more privileges and the introduction of an elective monarchy. Yes, things were not looking good. As ruler, I focused on developing Wieliczka and the salt extraction there, Poland's white gold, which I then exported to the west and east. Thanks to that, I had the funds to build new towns along the Vistula River, which enriched my treasury, but more importantly, strengthened my royal authority. After some time, I was already rich enough, by Eastern European standards of course, to set the burghers and the nobility against each other. By exploiting that conflict, my royal authority became much stronger. Unfortunately, I can't show this to you because the save from the previous version is incompatible with the current version of the game. But overall, building Poland from sea to sea and creating power based on that gave me more satisfaction than in Victoria 3, where I played as Kraków under Austrian rule and created the Great Commonwealth. Why? Because in Victoria 3, I never felt immersion. I never felt the realism of the history I was creating. Unlike in Europa Universalis 5, where I constantly had to take care of my population, act for the benefit of my estates, grant and revoke privileges, not just to satisfy those estates, but to start the process of change in the country and strengthen royal authority as well as think about developing national prosperity. Only when your population grows and your country reaches a certain level of prosperity can you start thinking about building a real empire, not like in Victoria 3, where as Kraków you can use the support independence mechanic to conquer provinces from Austria and Russia within 20 years and then within another 60 declare war on the world. In this game, if I started as a Silesian duchy, I would be happy if within 60 years I conquered half of Silesia. Because unlike in EU4, Conquest doesn't end with integrating a province. No, I have to make sure there is the right culture there, or make the existing culture at least accepted or tolerated. Otherwise, those people won't feel part of my country and will start to flee. Or rebellion after rebellion will erupt. And the same goes for religion. So Conquest and expansion in Europa Universalis 5, unlike in practically all other Paradox games, CK3, Victoria 3 or EU4 is also a process. It's not like from the very start you begin blobbing everywhere. You declare singular war, secure some territory, secure its population, because in reality, war is about one of two things, either gaining population or specific resources. Unlike in other Paradox games, a province for the sake of a province is worth nothing, because most of the time you don't even have control over it yet. It only develops over time, when you establish administration, build roads, or research technological solutions that make managing a vast country easier. You have to ensure that culturally and religiously those societies are part of your empire. Otherwise, just like the whole region around Poznan, it becomes more of a cost than something that benefits Poland. Besides, land-based expansion, like that of Poland or Russia, looks completely different from that of maritime powers, which built their expansion through the sea. In Europa Universalis 4, playing Poland for conquest or Castile for conquest was very similar. Here, it's completely different. For example, as Poland, the first thing you want to focus on is building a road network, and as Castile, building a fleet. That's why, as Poland, I will support land values, and as Castile, naval values. A country that chooses one path will perform much worse in the other. In Europa Universalis 4, I could just as easily conquer inland territories as Castile, or make a colonial empire as Castile or Poland, which, by the way, I've shown on my channel. Of course, there's still the possibility to change Poland's values and go in the direction of sea exploration, but that will be a very long process in Europa Universalis 5. In EU4, this was basically made harder by national ideas which, let's say, currently don't exist in that form. Although, in my opinion, this role is now played by special technological research available only for specific countries. And then there are the missions, because Poland in EU4 has no colonial missions. And speaking of missions, that was another system that I heard wouldn't be in Europa Universalis 5, and that worried me, because I love mission trees. Yes, I know you don't necessarily have to like them. And you know what? Paradox lied to me about that. Because mission trees do exist, you just have to enable them in the settings, along with the rewards. However, they mainly serve a tutorial purpose, like a generic tree designed to teach you things such as colonization, declaring wars, or developing specific provinces. They're divided into economy, politics, and expansion, and they're all quite generic. You complete a set of tasks to receive some rewards. There you go, there's your mission tree. But these missions are a smokescreen, a deception that hides what's really going on. Because the mission system does exist. And Paradox has already started to monetize it. Dynamic historical events. Does that ring a bell? Many creators, myself included, have rightfully noticed that this is where all the nation-specific content is hidden. It took me a while to realize that many events require specific conditions to be met before they can occur. And once they do, you receive a reward. Of course, not all events work that way, some are time-triggered instead. But ultimately, this means I'll be spending time on the EU5 wiki, browsing through each nation's events just like I often do now in EU4. Basically, each historical event boils down to a choice. Will you follow the historical path that the nation originally took or choose an alternate route? The rewards or penalties, aside from various modifier bonuses, often include things like estate loyalty adjustments or unique technologies. And the sheer amount of historical knowledge embedded in these events is definitely a big plus for this system. What can be both a strength and a weakness though is that if you don't know these events, you can end up taking a completely different path in every playthrough, experiencing things you never expected. From a player's perspective, that's great. But from a content creator's perspective, like mine, not so much, because I usually plan my campaigns and aim for specific goals. For example, if I play as England, I'd really like to know how to trigger Anglicanism or the Wars of the Roses. I've played England around 4 times and I've never gotten either of those. Yes, I'll admit I'm a bit lazy, I don't dig through the game files to find out how things work, but honestly, I don't think that's how a game should be learned anyway. Still, I must admit, experiencing a nation's path for the first time is truly fascinating, because unexpected things can happen that completely surprise you. But what about nations that have very little flavor, or none at all? That means you end up playing almost every country the same way, right? And this is the main problem I currently have, for example, with Victoria 3. Because even though that game keeps improving with every patch, with every DLC, apart from a few nations, every country plays almost the same. It doesn't matter whether you're Spain, a former colonial empire, or Siam, you're essentially striving for the same goals, carrying out reforms in almost the same way. There are only a few, maybe a dozen nations like the Ottoman Empire, Brazil, or France that have truly unique content. Alright, the Balkan states were added in the latest DLC too. In EU4, countries not only have mission trees but also unique national ideas. Because of that, most nations feel distinct, better suited for certain playstyles and weaker in others. Crusader Kings 3 approached this idea of national diversity in a very clever way, which I really like because gameplay is shaped also by your culture and religion. And on top of that, you can often merge cultures, creating the most bizarre and creative setups imaginable, and honestly, I'll probably make Polish samurai or a Japanese hussar army one day. Alright, I know there are no hussars in CK3, but there is cavalry. And basically, Paradox implemented both systems, from CK3 and EU4 into EU5. Each era lets you choose your nation's focus or stance in a given field, making it specialize in certain aspects. So in a way, it's the equivalent of idea groups rather than national ideas from EU4. And honestly, when I played theoretically similar nations like England and Castile, I never chose the same ideas in the same eras. Even though both are colonial powers, they face different problems that require different approaches. And when I played Portugal, I picked yet another set of ideas. There are 6 eras, which means tons of possible combinations. As for national ideas, to be honest, I think they exist here too. They're found in the Content tab and under Country bonuses, which unlock specific technological developments unique to certain nations, like Hussars for Poland. And yes, unfortunately, that's a bit unfair to countries that don't have this kind of exclusive content. However, this is balanced out by the fact that EU5 borrows another system from Crusader Kings 3. Each nation differs by its main culture, government type, and religion. So even if your country lacks special scripted content, it will still play differently, because the religious differences alone are massive. Gameplay variety also comes from the diversity of resources. Different resources dominate in Asia or Africa. Even within Europe, you can clearly distinguish the East from the West. And from the Americas, only through colonization can you obtain very unique raw materials. And that naturally invites a comparison to Victoria 3. Because I think there's not much to say about the economic system from Europa Universalis 4, and in CK3 it simply doesn't exist. In Victoria 3, however, it's far more complex. The entire system revolves around money, which is generated by buildings that pay wages to their workers, while the state budget depends on how you tax different aspects of life. In Europa Universalis 5, it's a bit simpler. You construct a building and that building earns profit from the difference between input material costs and output value. That profit then goes to the social estates as a whole, not to individual workers. The profit is divided based on the power of each estate in a given region. Then, depending on your tax settings, a portion of that income is taxed and transferred into your national budget. So you could say that the economic system in EU5 is something in between EU4 and Victoria 3, but only in the sense of how money is generated in those games. Now let's talk about building an economy in Victoria 3. Anyone who's played that game for over 100 hours knows that the economic build-up looks almost the same for every nation. You always strive to have as many tool factories as possible, at first relying heavily on logging camps and later of course on iron and coal mines, because without them nothing works. The problem is every nation aims for the same thing, and ever since Paradox globalized trade in Victoria 3, even if you lack access to those resources, you can just import them easily through trade. Then you usually move on to furniture or clothing, and until you unlock automobiles, that's the core of your economy in every game, no matter what country you play. In EU5, because of how resources are distributed around the world, you no longer have this everywhere has everything situation. For example, as Poland, I based my early economy on salt production, which later allowed me to expand the country and turn it into a trade hub between Western and Eastern Europe. And by the way, trade is an inseparable part of economic development in EU5. Because tell me, in Victoria, have you ever truly become a trade hub? Maybe only early on when you import cheap resources like wood from Russia or grain from China through trade treaties. In EU5 though, as Poland, I played as a trade hub for the entire campaign. Moving on, when I played Spain, I built my economy around high-quality textiles and surprisingly books, since Castile has access to large amounts of cheap wool. And in this case, England plays somewhat similarly, facing nearly identical conditions, except that with England I supplied Northern Europe, while with Castile I supplied the Mediterranean basin. Playing as Sweden, I quickly realized I had huge amounts of cheap iron, so I became a major tool supplier for nearly all of Northern Europe. Then I played the Mali Empire, which could be described as suffering from a prosperity crisis, because it has so much gold with no one to sell it to early on that gold becomes practically worthless. But soon, as you advance technologically, you gain access to Moroccan or Castilian markets, and then the gold starts flowing, filling your coffers. Later on, if I remember correctly, I also exported large amounts of ivory. In Vijayanagar, pepper is absolutely essential. You can quickly establish trade relations with Arabian states, which then sell that pepper to Egypt, and from there it flows into Europe, where it's in massive demand. So that's how you build your early economy, on pepper and gold. Hungary has a very unique situation because it's extremely rich in gold and silver, which strongly fuels its early economic growth. But over time, once treasuries fill up, Hungary can start producing cheap gold jewelry, effectively becoming a monopoly across Europe. So as you can see, each nation's economic development feels truly unique. Sure, eventually some kind of meta will probably emerge, most likely revolving around high-quality textiles. But again, that depends on production methods. And when you look at how many different ways there are to produce the same good, you realize you're no longer limited to specific raw materials. You simply need to figure out what your nation can specialize in. That's a huge advantage compared to Victoria 3. Because in Victoria 3, if you don't have wood, iron, coal or sulfur, you simply can't build an economy. And basically, let's move on to these markets. Since I keep mentioning them, they're an inseparable part of Europa Universalis 5, and I have to say, Paradox really did an excellent job here. In Europa Universalis 5, you can truly feel the immersion of trade between markets. It's extremely important to gain monopolies or trade dominance on specific markets. And because there are so many of these markets, you'll always find some opportunity somewhere that the automation system hasn't exploited yet. But the automation has one major flaw: it only handles the current situation, not the long-term perspective. Sometimes it's actually worth importing goods at a slight loss or break-even just to secure cheap input materials, so that, for example, your textile workshops can make huge profits, which means you'll collect more in taxes. Or you might flood the European market with your cheap resources, pushing out the remaining competitors. Besides, in EU5, trade system works brilliantly when it's semi-automated. At any moment, on any market you control, you can decide that a certain portion of trade capacity belongs to you and you handle it manually. For example, maybe you want to import specific raw materials for a production method, something that won't earn you profit in trade directly, but will make you profit from selling the finished product later. So, you manually import the unprofitable raw materials needed for production and then let the automation handle the sale of the final goods, because it will automatically distribute them where you'll earn the most. In Victoria 3, on the other hand, the market is almost entirely automated now, with a few exceptions. Trade between countries basically doesn't exist because individual markets supply goods to the global market or pull them from it. It's like one huge invisible intermediary and overlay over all markets. In theory, that means every country has access to every pool of goods worldwide, a big simplification of course. Now Victoria 3 does have a trade influence mechanic, but it works very differently from EU5, and we have much less control over it compared to Paradox's new system. Ultimately, it all boils down to this. If you need specific goods in your country in Victoria 3, you often have to negotiate trade agreements because automatic trade won't always supply enough. I'm not saying that's a bad system, it's probably even more realistic than what we have in EU5, but in Victoria 3 I just don't feel any satisfaction from trading. Whereas in EU5, I absolutely do. Although I won't hide it, at first I approached country development in EU5 the wrong way. I tried to micromanage every single location, and I admit, the game completely overwhelmed me. I almost decided to give it up entirely. Just like I did with Imperator Rome, which I don't even have installed anymore, I'll need to reinstall it. Because Imperator Rome, much like EU5, has a ridiculous number of locations within a single province, but the problem there was that there was so much clicking, moving, populations, micromanagement, and I absolutely hated it. So, despite all the later updates, for me the biggest pain point of that game remained, and I never returned to it. Even though I love ancient history and that whole setting. And the best thing is, EU5 doesn't have that problem, even though it has even more locations than Imperator Rome, and you can manage every single one of them. Paradox created a whole set of systems, starting with automation, which you can enable once your country becomes too large to handle manually, and it works pretty well. Then there's the brilliant macro builder system, where you can construct buildings based on maximum profit, and alongside that you have a ton of filters you can use. And then there's the private sector aspect. When your social classes are happy and earn more than they spend, they will construct buildings on their own, often exactly the ones you need. You have no idea how much I'd love for Paradox to optimize the production interface in EU4 to match what we have in EU5, or at least let us demolish buildings directly from that panel. I'd probably even go back to world conquest runs in that game. Imagine being able to lead armies calmly using a quick build and quick demolish panel instead of having to pause and spend half an hour deleting buildings one by one in each location. And speaking of the military, the system in EU5 is an evolution of what we had in EU4 and Imperator Rome, but it's been streamlined, with the weird mechanics removed. Automation has been significantly improved, especially in terms of issuing army orders. Every player who's ever continued a campaign past 1600 in EU4 or tried doing a world conquest will appreciate this. Because let's be honest, manually commanding 300,000 troops, moving them province by province, is incredibly boring, especially when it's yet another world conquest. What I also really like about EU5 is that the diplomacy system comes straight from EU4 and Imperator Rome, that's the classic Paradox diplomacy, and in my opinion, the best one they've ever designed. Not that strange one from Victoria 3, where you can improve relations, do diplomatic actions, and yet the country still refuses an alliance or won't support you in war. And why? Because in CK3, diplomacy barely exists, or rather it's entirely based on characters and family connections. Yes, the character system in CK3 is very detailed, and you can clearly see that EU5 drew some inspiration from it, but only to a certain extent. In EU5, sure, characters have traits, but the system itself is much closer to EU4 than to CK3. Look, traits, they're here, just like in EU4. 3 main stats that define your ruler, they're here too, just like in EU4. What's really changed are the interactions you can have with characters. But most of those boil down to marriage, altering the line of succession. Oh, and educating heirs, which to be fair is a very important mechanic. And that's about it. You don't need to care about your distant cousins or about your wife's stats, they don't affect your heir's quality, nor are her stats added to yours. The only thing that really matters is whether a marriage grants you a personal union. Sure, when appointing advisors, it's worth checking which social class they come from, because depending on your laws, you might accidentally empower a class you didn't want to. But that's about it. Characters in EU5 have no personal ambitions, no loyalty issues, they simply exist and you can use them or ignore them. I think even in Imperator Rome, generals could rebel, but that's not possible here. And honestly, I'm glad, because I hated that system in Imperator Rome. When I want to deal with characters, I play CK3, when I play Europa Universalis, I care about the country. To sum it up, Europa Universalis 4 is a great game, but you'll never forget that you're playing a game. In Europa Universalis 5 though, you can completely lose yourself, it pulls you in, to the point where, when you're about to declare war, at least for me, I stop and think, do I really need this territory? It has no valuable population, different culture and religion, its resources are common, and I already have plenty in my empire. It would just make my name bigger. And then you click Declare War, because yes, you want that bigger name, but sometimes you'll regret it later. Just like I did during my full Spain campaign, which I've already completed. I highly recommend watching it, especially if you want to see not only how Europa Universalis 4 and Europa Universalis 5 differ, but also how EU5 actually plays, and how easy it is to get completely immersed in it.